Now, what African countries need most, I think, is capacity building. And in this way, I think purely official government aid is not sufficient. But purely engaging on the commercial side or corporate side is also not sufficient. Therefore, I think China has come up with a very unique way, as I mentioned, a bundled approach, government combined with corporates. So it's a total solution provider, and it's a one-stop shop for many urgent needs in Africa. So I would say capacity building, whichever country can help African countries in building up the capacity, it will be good. Now, talking about China and Brazil, I think these two economies, by now, the Chinese central bank has already acknowledged that the Chinese economy has already surpassed Japan and become the second largest economy in the world by using official exchange rate. If you use PPP, it's much larger than by using official exchange rate. And China, amazingly, is the largest creditor nation to the United States. This is unprecedented in recent history, ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And China, with a vast foreign currency reserve, currently at $2.5 trillion US dollars, and is increasing every month, has not only the manufacturing capability, but increasingly so, the financing capability which it can provide to African countries. Now, two financial institutions in China are very active in Africa. One is called the China Development Bank, which is mostly focused on longer-term project-based projects. The other one is China Import and Export Bank, which is more on the trade financing side. But increasingly, these two large Chinese financial institutions compete with each other in the context of Africa. Further, the largest commercial bank in the whole world is a bank called ICBC, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. It has bought a controlling stake in a bank called the Standard Bank, headquartered in Africa, with branch operations in, I think, more than 30 countries in Africa. So increasingly, Standard Bank, and with its controlling stakeholder, ICBC, which is the largest commercial bank in the world, will also be very, very active in a regular, normal commercial banking activities in Africa. Therefore, when you talk about Chinese investments into Africa, they are mostly financed either by China Development Bank, which is more focused on projects for the longer term, or China Import and Export Bank, or I would say increasingly through ICBC and its South African headquartered Standard Bank. But coming back to Brazil, from the Chinese mind, Brazil is a wonderful country with huge potentials. You are talking about a country with more than 7 million square kilometers. China, for its 5,000 years of history, is only about a fraction bigger than Brazil. And China imports increasing amount of iron ore, coal, grain, and many other things from Brazil. And China has great admirations for many things Brazil are very good at. For example, deep sea oil drilling and exploration. For example, civilian short and medium distance aviations, etc. And China is also very good at certain things that Brazil is not very good at. After all, China is the workshop of the world. And I think with increasing investment in infrastructure, and now China is unfolding a big campaign of building the largest network of the fastest train in the whole world. It travels at 380 kilometers per hour, a journey from Shanghai to Beijing, which covers about 1,400, will be reduced to about 4 hours. So it's even better, even more efficient, traveling by the high-speed train than by airplane, amazingly. So I think if you look at China and Brazil, these two economies are not competitors with each other. I would say in 9 to 15 years, the Chinese economy will surpass that of the United States and will become the largest economy in the world, and will remain so for many decades to come. Brazilian economy will be increasing and will become very strong. On a per capita basis, I think Brazil will be much better off than China on a per capita basis, but Chinese economy as a total size will be staggering. And it will need a lot of things from Brazil, and Brazil will become very, very beneficial to itself by engaging in China, by treating China as a major economy and a market in the world. Now, therefore, let me come back very briefly to China and Brazil and Africa. If we look at this, because even just between China and Brazil, the relations are not competitive with each other. They are actually partners with each other. Therefore, when we bring in Africa as another dimension to this whole equation, I would argue that China and Brazil can actually be very good partners together in Africa. For example, why couldn't Chinese companies and Brazilian companies become co-investors in some major development situations? For example, deep sea oil and gas situations of Nigeria in the deep sea area, where China has tremendous amount of demand, but Brazil has much better technology and expertise. Why couldn't China and Brazil cooperate together in helping some of the African countries, especially the Portuguese-speaking countries? Now, you probably remember in Macau, several years ago, they held the first Portuguese-speaking countries forum in the world. And they brought in all the Portuguese-speaking countries to Macau. Not because there is very active casino business in Macau, I'm sure, but because it can be actually a good linchpin to all the Portuguese-speaking countries in the world. Therefore, I would want to end by being on a very positive note. That is, China and Brazil can and are and will increasingly be very good partners with each other. And China and Brazil can very much cooperate. Purely from the African perspective, if you ask our African brothers and sisters what they need, I would say they will say the more investment, either from China or from Brazil or from India or from EU, from Japan, from the United States, the better. The more, the better. Even if we maximize our investment in Africa, it's still not sufficient. Africa needs a lot of help. But with some constructive help, Africa can stand on its feet, and Africa can be very constructive partners for both China and Brazil. I'm a true believer in our capability of cooperation between China and Brazil in the context of Africa. Thank you very much.